Greetings students, this is Shreya Singh, Department of History, Patna Women's College. Today we will be discussing about the concept of Sino-Centrism that was popularized by China in order to impose its ideologies forcibly on countries in its close vicinity and across the world. In general parlance, we find that the word Sino-Centrism is synonymous with the concept of China being the center of the world. It was during pre-modern times we find that this concept took shape and circulated the view that China is the most advanced civilization in the world. In a way, it can be perceived that Sino-Centrism was another form of Ethnocentrism which was practiced during the time of Han Dynasty. Now, what is Ethnocentrism? A simple definition of Ethnocentrism is a concept or an ideology which motivates a country to perceive its culture as superior to others. In other words, one can say that it is a kind of cultural subjugation. This theory rose in contradiction of the concept of Westphalian sovereignty that came into existence in the middle of 17th century. Now, Westphalian sovereignty was a principle in international law that each state has exclusive sovereignty over its territory. Now, in order to have a clear picture of the concept, we shall go through some case studies. That is, we will try to analyze the influence of Sino-Centrism on other East Asian countries in brief. So, let us take the example of Korea. Since a long time, the southern Korean states were protected from Chinese invasions by militarily powerful northern Korean states. The most important aspect was that it considered itself as an equally supreme state as China and adopted its own centric system to adjacent countries. Very sternly, it refused to pay tributes to Chinese emperor and continued to conquer easternmost territories of China. Now, an important invasion took place in between 598 to 614, which was the invasion of Goguryeo. Now, this victory somehow led to the rise of ethnic superiority in Goguryeo. However, Goguryeo was defeated by the allied forces of Silla, which was one of the three kingdoms of Korea along with the Tang dynasty of China. So, thus the kingdom once again became the tributary of China. Now, with passage of time, other dynasties came and didn't express any abhorrence towards the idea of Sino-Centrism. The Silla Empire was overthrown later on by Goryeo. During this time of Goryeo, Korea began to idolize Chian Song's dynasty and willingly accepted the idea of cultural assimilation with China. Again, the Joseon dynasty, which ruled in between 1392 to 1910, willingly accepted the system of Sino-Centrism. Nevertheless, the situation changed with the dethronement of Ming dynasty by Qing dynasty, and Qing dynasty practiced the most brutal form of Sino-Centrism and was considered as barbarous. So, on account of this, charm of Sino-Centrism waned off in Korea after the decline of Ming dynasty in 1644. So, let us now take the case of Vietnam. Vietnam enjoyed intimate relationship with China, though it was independent and had been a part of various Chinese kingdoms for around 900 years before gaining independence in 10th century. Though Vietnam drove out Chinese invaders frequently, yet it failed to prevent itself from getting affected by various aspects of Chinese culture, which included administrative system, architecture, philosophy, religion, literature of China, and even the language Chinese. It greatly adopted the teachings of Confucius, and Vietnamese merchants played an important role in the spread of Confucianism across the world. So, in fact, the Chinese rulers were so influenced by Chinese cultures and customs that they started forcing it on common folk. Ruler Nguyen was the one who forced Chinese style clothing on Vietnamese people. Trousers were replaced by traditional skirts of the females, tunics and trousers which once was popular among the Han Chinese were worn by the Vietnamese. But with the coming up of 19th century, such influence even waned off in Korea and it started to revere its own cultural heritage. Next, we will talk about the influence of Sino-Centrism on Japan. Since the beginning of Taika reforms in the year 645 by Emperor Kotoku, we find that Japan began to execute the principles of Confucianism in almost every aspect of its political, social and economic life. The series of reforms began with land reforms, which was solely based on the ideals of Chinese philosopher Confucius. The main objective of the reform was to bring about greater centralization and enhance the power of imperial court as it was pursued or followed by China. Thus, we can see that Japan remodeled its entire state and administrative apparatus on the Chinese system, and so began the period of Chinese influence on many aspects of Japanese culture. In the year 1401, Shogun Yoshimitsu started the tribute system with China, which was practiced in ancient times. He revived trading activities and Japanese products were traded for Chinese goods. But this kind of tributary relationship ended in the year 1551. The status quo changed with the coming up of Mongol-led Yuan dynasty of China. Japan began to disregard Chinese land and started eulogizing its own culture and traditions. It also started its territorial expansion with its unification in the year 1592 to 1593 and tried to capture Korea. Japan also tried to invade China, but all its attempts met with dejection. However, the positive side of this invasion was that national consciousness began to rise in Japan and Japanese began to realize the divine nature of their country and its spiritual supremacy over China. In 657, Tokugawa Mitsukuni, who was a Japanese feudal lord, established Mito School, which was charged with the duty of writing a history of Japan, highlighting it as a perfect example of a nation under Confucius thoughts. Thus, Japan began to claim that it were the Japanese who were the legitimate heirs of Chinese culture. Also, it was Japan who suggested on using the name China for China instead of using Shogoku, which meant central country and was popularly used by Chinese folk. Lastly, we would take up Burma, which kept itself aloof from the sphere of Sino-Centrism. It used a different language and followed its own culture and traditions. However, China always claimed Burma to be its vassal state, but a peep into Burmese historical accounts suggests that Burma never was a vassal of China and it always considered itself as equal to China. Thus, we can conclude that China's stubbornness and feeling of superiority that it fostered became the reason for its domination by the European powers in 17th and 18th century. I hope you found the lecture insightful and informative. Thank you.